When you have lost someone that you love and you're feeling that deep, deep sadness, do you find that God winks happen more frequently? Now, in my research with God winks, I have found that people who are going through sorrow see more God winks. And I think that'll be confirmed in this collection of God winks. Right in the center of the state of Iowa, there's a little town called State Center. That's where Gordon and Norma lived all their lives. You see, Gordon married Norma on the night she graduated from high school, and then for the next 72 years, people always saw them together. They were always holding hands. Norma was known as a great party host, and Gordon, he was just the life of the party. They just loved being together. In fact, when the kids grew up, they started getting worried about that because they said, what happens if one survives and the other doesn't? Gordon had an answer for that too. He said, well, I'll just wait for her, and she'd do the same for me. Now, every single morning, Gordon and Norma would drive out for breakfast at the diner at the edge of town. Every day until that fateful day, there was a terrible automobile accident, and the two of them were rushed to the hospital, clinging to life. When they got there, the nurses put their beds together. The family gathered around, and the family noticed that they were still holding hands even though they were in a coma. And then at 3:38 in the afternoon, Gordon, the life of the party, passed on to heaven. The family, looking at the heart monitor, they noticed that Gordon's monitor was still beeping. They looked at the nurse and said, how can that be? And she said, they're still holding hands. Her heart is beating through his and being picked up on the monitor. 1 hour later, to the minute, Norma caught up with Gordon on the way to heaven. And the nurse said, he is such a gentleman. He's standing there holding the gate open for her. What a God wink. You know, that story gets me every single time. There's another story about loss that defies all odds. It involves a famous actress who was going through sorrow. Take a look.
The car taking Diane Lane to the studio snaked through New York traffic, and all those taxi cabs, you know, those yellow cabs, were darting in every direction. Diane Lane was looking through the back window. She was thinking forlornly about the fact that her father used to be one of those cab drivers. Cab number 6F99. She could remember it every day. Oh, how she missed her dad. He died just 6 months earlier. Her mind drifted back to when she was a young girl standing at the curb after school, standing on her tippy toes, looking through the sea of yellow cabs, waiting for her dad to come and pick her up like a chariot to pick up a princess. And then it would appear, 6F99. The door would open and her dad would say, okay, princess, anywhere you want to go. She missed her dad. Wouldn't she have loved it if he were there today? If she only knew that he was up there in heaven looking at her. If there was only some sign. The car pulled to the curb at the studio and she stepped out. And then her heart leapt. Pulling in right in front of them was cab number 6F99. Wow, what are the odds of that? Well, 1 in 15,000, because that's how many cabs there are in New York City.
You know, there is something very special about dads and daughters, which makes the loss particularly painful. Diane Lane experienced that, and so did Stacia Kelly in this story.
25-year-old Stacia Kelly was devastated. She'd gotten the news in the middle of the night that her father had died of a heart attack. She quickly packed some belongings and headed for the airport, took a seat next to the window and opened the morning newspaper. And the headline was about her father, Emmett Kelly, world's most famous clown, dead at 80. Do you remember Emmett Kelly? He was the hobo clown with a sad face, while all other clowns in the Ringling Brothers circus had grins from ear to ear. He had a sad face. That was his trademark. He made sure he never had a picture taken with anything but the sad face, and he was successful. All except for that one time. He was being interviewed by a UPI photographer reporter, interrupted by a phone call. "Emmett, congratulations, you're the father of a new baby girl." He grinned from ear to ear, and at that moment the photographer went click, and the next day that picture went around the globe, newspapers everywhere. Back on the plane, Stacia reached into her bag, pulled out an old yellow newspaper, and looked at that one picture of her father smiling. And you know how sometimes God lets us see something we never saw before, and in that moment, she began to understand what he was smiling about. He was smiling about her. She began to cry. There was a man seated next to her. He leaned across. He said, "Miss, are you okay?" She pointed to the picture and said, "Yes, my father died last night." The man turned ashen. He said, "You won't believe this. I'm the photographer who took that picture 25 years ago. And you can't imagine how thrilled your father was on that day that you were born." What a God wink. And in that moment, a peace came over Stacia, a peace that surpasses all understanding. And she knew that everything was going to be okay.
There's another kind of loss that happens obviously more to young women. But young women and men are rarely prepared for the pain that they will suffer when they lose a child through miscarriage.
You know, sometimes when we get beaten up by life, we start doing a whole laundry list of all the times that we've ever been beaten up. And on this particular morning, Bethany was even thinking of the childhood friend who had taunted her, saying, "You can't wear red because you have red hair." Well, over the last 2 days, she had been beaten up by the tragedy of a miscarriage. She'd been crushed. But on this morning, she got up and she felt a need to be defiant. She went to the cookie jar and took out $20, got into the car and headed for Target. And all the way there, she said, "I can wear red if I want to." And so she went up one aisle and down the other. And then she turned a corner and she saw what she had in mind, a pair of red, shiny Mary Jane shoes up on top of a pile. And she took them down. They were just over $20. She tried them on, a perfect fit. And then when she looked at the designer label, she squealed with joy because the name inside the shoe was a great God wink. Her own name was the designer's name, Bethany. She skipped all the way to the checkout counter, knowing that she had just gotten a great God wink of hope.
At times of sorrow, God winks are like life preservers tossed to you from above. They're like stepping stones through difficult waters, helping you to the other side where you'll find comfort and peace. I'm Squire Rushnell. Good wishes and God winks.